I think it's a litmus test for Mark Carney. There was a lot of grandiose promises by Mr. Carney during the election that he would build, baby, build faster than you'd ever imagined we could build. So when is this building going to happen?
Dare I say that Canada is broken? And I'll show you the cold, hard data to prove that. In fact, so broken that Alberta had to make national headlines yesterday because investors won't touch us with a 10-foot pole. No matter how much Melanie Joly wants to say they're so interested in working with us. I'm Jasmine Lane. Subscribe, like, follow on other social media platforms, comment your thoughts down below, and share this video. You know, the meltdowns and criticisms, they don't prove any points. Most of them are highly misinformed. It actually just shows us who our leaders truly work for, something that committee exposed while discussing Mark Carney's conflicts of interest yesterday.
On the ostriches in British Columbia and the culling order that they are facing.
Really incredible that the Liberals have caused so much, because of the Liberal incompetence, we're in this mess. And when you have an incompetent government, you have messes like the inflation crisis, like the crime crisis, like the border crisis, like the investment crisis, like the fastest shrinking economy in the entire G7. When you have an incompetent government, you get lots of these messes.
Wait, on the ostriches, sir. Sir, you didn't say what your stance is on the ostriches.
This lady
Why won't you answer your stance on the ostriches?
I just did. I said the Liberals are incompetent. That's my stance.
Do you support the culling order?
Can I just...
Can we get your reaction to the new lumber tariffs?
That has been going viral, especially amongst conservatives, as well as those who are very much against the culling order, of which we are still waiting to find out the finer details on. I have a couple points to make there because a lot of people have asked me my opinion on how he handled that. And I'll say, no, I wasn't a great big fan of the way that it was kind of dismissed and moved on to the next question. However, if you've ever been a part of a press scrum, it's very limited on time. There's a million people yelling at you, so it is what it is. I would also assume that the reason why he has not taken a stance, and I don't actually know this, but my assumption here is that the reason why he hasn't taken a stance is probably because they're still looking at all of the information. As I said in a previous video, it would be very bad judgment for him to say, this is terrible, and then it rules that in fact all of these ostriches are actually sick and they're a threat to humanity. Not saying that that's the case, but you have to be really careful and strategic about these things. And while this topic has really touched the hearts of so many people, there are MPs, there are conservative MPs who have been calling this out, there for the cause from day one. People who are from that riding. That is literally the job of an MP, not so much the job of the leader of the opposition, unless that is his constituency, right? So I do think that that's something that's getting kind of lost. There's a lot of people who are pitting this on Pierre Poilievre in particular.
Hal Duggan from the Canadian Press. There is an ostrich farm out in BC that's facing a potential cull of its ostriches. Its supporters are looking to see if you support or oppose this. Have you taken any kind of position on this, or are you willing to speak to this matter in the House, as some of your MPs have?
Well, just yesterday I did speak on it, pointing out that this is just another example of total Liberal incompetence. They've mismanaged this from the very beginning, and now they've left Canadians confused, farmers baffled by the total incompetence by the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. Another disastrous Liberal mishandling of an issue that has left us with the problem we have today.
Isn't it so interesting to you how nobody in mainstream media cared about this topic at all? That question was asked by the Canadian Press, so clearly they've been running stories on this, right? They've been talking about this, and they're wondering why Poilievre has been so silent. Oh, wait. Actually, if you just search it into their website, no, they haven't covered it at all. They didn't talk about it once. They still haven't. Interesting, isn't it? How nobody cared whatsoever until there was this really sudden mass push on social media, particularly with people bashing Pierre Poilievre on not making a formal statement of support towards it. Like, isn't that weird? Could that be an attempt to try and thwart some support away from Pierre Poilievre? Maybe. Has Mark Carney, the Prime Minister, received any backlash in the same way that Pierre Poilievre has? You'd think that Mark Carney would be able to do a hell of a lot more as leader, Prime Minister, than Pierre Poilievre could. Seems a little odd. I'll leave that with you to ponder.
Mr. Mr. Speaker, interest rates are down, and when you look at it, wages are growing higher than inflation as we speak. And meanwhile, CPPIB CEO says that the world's largest investors are focusing on Canada. Mr. Speaker, what are we doing? We're building national major projects. We're making sure also to launch a new defense industrial strategy. We'll create jobs in this country, and meanwhile, the opposition needs to come on board to make sure that Canadians benefit from it as well.
Well, let's look into that CPPIB CEO and exactly what it was that he had to say in that article she's referencing, because in it, it actually says that we have a moment of investor attention, not a flood of capital yet. Let's just keep reading here. It shows that big investors from Asia and the Middle East are curious, asking for a primer on Canada. Though, historically, global portfolios allocate less than 1% to Canada. So Canada is attractive for stability, resources, and their proximity to the United States. But policy volatility is the main risk. In fact, this article actually urged leaders to move fast and cut friction before capital disappears overnight. It also emphasized that investors want clear, durable rules, not shifting political signals. Ooh.
When Prime Minister Carney set up his blind trust, he knew exactly what went in it, correct? And it's unlikely the assets that went into the blind trust in such a short period of time have changed significantly, correct?
Ethics Commissioner von Finkenstein acknowledged that most trustees will not change the holdings. So I agree with that. They won't. And even if they did, they're going to be investing in big businesses in Canada, and you're going to know they're investing in big business in Canada. I mean, we have conglomerates of industry sectors that are dominated by big businesses, and you're going to be invested in them because that's what everyone invests in Canada.
Melanie Joly is talking about all of these massive global investors that are looking into Canada, and there's one that comes to mind here. I don't know. It might rhyme with Muckfield.
They told us to build the most resilient economy. That's what we're going to do. We're going to build the most resilient economy in the G7. That's why we said that we need to spend less so we can invest more. Unlike the Conservative, Mr. Speaker, instead of talking down Canada, they should celebrate the work of this government.
You know what's interesting, actually? Brookfield Asset Management ranks number 1 among global infrastructure fund managers. That is according to infrastructureinvestment.com. Also, Brookfield jumped from 60th place to 31st place among the top 500 asset managers. They currently have over $1 trillion in assets under management across all of their operations. In private equity circles, Brookfield ranks among the top global firms. It was actually ranked 24th in PEI's list of PEI 300 of largest private equity firms. So they're not just a Canadian player. They are a top-tier global force, especially in infrastructure and alternative investments. So it gives any government with ties to them a lot of potential for high leverage there. The real question here isn't really how big their name is. It's massive, but it's how deep its influence or conflicts may in fact run.
That's right. Not all the details.
That's remarkable. But the Prime Minister, he knows what's in them, right?
Yes.
And would you say the Prime Minister is entitled to future carried interest payments based on the performance of those funds, correct?
I wouldn't say the infamous phrase that he's entitled to is entitlements, but yes, he is entitled to that and to the value of the stock options when they eventually mature in 2033, 2034.
Let me ask this. In New York, when the Prime Minister was there just last week, he met with a variety of investment managers, all who are implicated in funds that he holds. That places him in a pretty precarious position of conflict, correct?
Yes.
Now, if it's highly likely that Mark Carney's Liberal government has made or will make publicly policy decisions that will impact the success of the holdings in these funds, Canada is at risk of entering a massive conflict of interest scenario, correct?
Canada's policymaking process, yes, because of the central role of the Prime Minister, who is the boss over all policymaking processes in the end.
So, Mr. Conacher, shouldn't the Prime Minister be absolutely required to disclose the assets that exist within these funds?
Yes, there should be full disclosure, but it doesn't. It adds a bit of transparency, but it doesn't resolve the conflict of interest. Transparency is transparency, and removing a conflict of interest is removing a conflict of interest. The one does not do the other.
And while this is something we have discussed many times on the show, it's something I would like to drill in just a little bit harder for you.
Would you agree? Because Mr. Carney handpicked the holdings and the companies that the fund is invested in, and therefore the companies his future performance pay worth potentially tens of millions of dollars is tied to, correct?
Yes, so when you have these kind of general funds, which again, it's legal to invest in some of them and keep it secret, some types of mutual funds, the details of what you're actually invested in is known to you, but not disclosed to the public.
So Mr. Carney therefore knows which public policy decisions will impact these holdings, which in turn impacts the future performance of the fund, which in turn affects the value of his future bonus pay. Meanwhile, Canadians are left in the dark. So Mr. Carney, as it pertains to his future bonus pay, is hiding his conflicts of interest from Canadians, isn't he?
Yes, again, that's legal to do, and what's even worse, because of another, the biggest loophole in the Act, he is allowed to participate in decisions 99% of the time that affect his investments.
Really, really interesting, isn't it? That all the while this is happening in committee, and instead the mainstream news is focusing on Pierre Poilievre not making a formal position on the Ostrich farm. I'm just saying, it's kind of weird. And while we're on the topic of investments, pretty interesting that Danielle Smith just announced that her government will front the push for a new pipeline to the BC coast.
Obviously, there's going to be a little bit of pushback here. We already have the premier to the west of us calling this not realistic, essentially a distraction. So how do you plan to deal with some of the opponents to this project, whether it's the premier next door, whether it's some of these indigenous groups, whether it's just activists who don't want a pipeline?
So I will continue, as I said, to work to build the coalition of partners who are going to be on board with this. But this is a Canada project, and this is a test of whether Canada works as a country. Because if we can't build with collaboration of the federal government and between provinces, if it's everybody gets to get their products going to market except Alberta, that's not a country. A country is one where we support each other. And I think Canadians are there, and I hope that we can get more and more politicians to get there too.
Something that any normal country in the world would not have to do because it would be driven by private capital, which it is in almost every other country in the world.
Mark Carney really only has to do one thing. I think it's a litmus test for Mark Carney. There was a lot of grandiose promises by Mr. Carney during the election that he would build, baby, build faster than you'd ever imagined we could build. So when is this building going to happen? Here we are, 6 months after he took office, and the new Liberal government looks an awful lot like the old Liberal government. The last 6 months looks an awful lot like the last 10 years, where they block, baby, block. So there's only one person who will decide if this pipeline gets built, and it's Mark Carney. So I would encourage you all to ignore provincial politicians who have no authority in this matter. Like this, the reality is the federal government has the full authority over interprovincial pipelines. So there's one man who stands in the way of this pipeline getting built. It's Mark Carney. If the Liberals want it built, they will immediately repeal the tanker ban so the pipe can fill a ship that goes abroad, the production cap so that our producers can make enough oil to go in the pipe, and C-69 so that the pipe can get rapidly approved. Mark Carney really only has to do one thing. Get out of the way. Get out of the way. I will note there is some good news, followed by bad news. Canadian pipeline companies are building pipelines. That's the good news. Terrible news. They're building them in the United States of America without taxpayer support. Enbridge is building 2 pipelines right now in the U.S. without taxpayer money. TransCanada Pipelines is building $8.5 billion of brand new projects in the United States without taxpayer money. But here in Canada, Mark Carney is in the way. So my message to Mark Carney, get out of the way, so that Canadians can get building a pipeline. That's the way we send our resources to 2.5 billion Asian customers, so we're no longer reliant on the Americans for all of our exports.
You cannot become an economic superpower when you keep saying no to the things that make you an economic superpower. Every other country in the world that actually wants to thrive and prosper has learned this, and they're doing it quite well. And for the record, global emissions have barely increased during that time frame of the rest of the world becoming an economic superpower while Canada stayed stranded over the last 10 years. I will say, though, there was a pretty rapid rise in emissions from 2000 to 2013, which was driven largely by coal-fired plants in Asia, which they're still doing. So yeah, it turns out that any increase when it comes to emissions is coming directly as a result from coal plants being developed like they are every week in China, and not at all from oil and gas being, pipelines being made, that sort of thing. So there's that.
We have supported the tanker ban from the very beginning because it is foundational to our ability to get some major projects done. Including at the Port of Prince Rupert, including major export projects like LNG Canada that have facilitated a 4% increase in Canadian GDP. And to put that tanker ban at threat, it's not just a threat to our pristine coast that so many British Columbians, including myself, value, but it is a direct economic threat to the kind of economy that we're trying to build in the country here. And so when I've said, let's cross that bridge when we come to it, we'll see what the Premier comes up with. I'm being polite. I am being polite. There is no project. There is no bridge to cross unless the Albertan government and the federal Canadian government are committing billions of taxpayer dollars to build this project. And if that is the plan, then they should be transparent about it. Don't mistake my politeness for weakness on protecting our economy and our coast. Now, I hope that clears things up, but let's cross that bridge once she's got a proponent in the mind.
Man, that is such an interesting misrepresentation of history. Eby keeps on saying, and he was really, really angry about this yesterday. He's mad about the potential of this project going forth. Really sucks he isn't King of Canada, I guess. He keeps saying that it's foundational on getting projects like LNG Canada built. Well, that's simply not true. The ban covers crude oil tankers, not LNG carriers. And LNG Canada went ahead in spite of the federal red tape, not because of it. There was nothing about that actually helped them at all. David Eby knows this. And he calls it not a real project because there's no private company at the table. Do you say the same thing to all of the money given in subsidies for all of the green energy projects? Nope, you do not. And that's also the point, Mr. Eby. No private capital wants to touch Canada because of the investment climate that Ottawa and British Columbia have created. So Alberta has been forced to step up as a proponent because governments like David Eby scare investors off. And the idea that removing the tanker ban is an economic threat? Yikes. What really threatens British Columbia's economy is irrational temper tantrums like that, which leave thousands of high-paying jobs, billions of dollars in revenue just sitting on the table while we continue to import oil from countries with terrible environmental records compared to ours. Really weird how he doesn't like to focus on that, hey? It's so weird to witness all of these environmentalist, compassionate people who just want to protect the world lose their mind over the idea of a Canadian pipeline under Canadian regulations, but they're perfectly happy to keep importing oil from countries such as Saudi Arabia. You should see how women are treated there. Nigeria, even, where the human rights record includes state executions of Christians, child labor in supply chains, as well as trafficking of oil. That is a very deadly business. The same crowd that screams about dirty oil from Alberta never ever bats an eyelash while rage tweeting from a phone built with cobalt dug up by children in the Congo. So weird how their moral outrage always points inward, never at the regimes of which their policies and decisions actually enrich. That's the thing about being conservative. You can call me any name in the book, but at least I am consistent on my morals and my values and whose economy I would like to support.
But it is still not a perfectly defined project. And there's still, there's private companies lining up to advise on it, but not lining up to invest on it, right? Yeah. So it hasn't fundamentally changed that.
Yeah, I think there are a number of projects before the Major Project Office that aren't fully fleshed out proposals.
Sure.
And a lot of what Ottawa has talked about so far, frankly, are supporting proposals that are actually already under development. I think it again comes back to the investment environment that we create here. For example, the LNG project in BC is waiting on a lot of FDI. They want the certainty of the investment environment before making such investments. And when we have arguments playing out like we do right now, with a proposal on paper that might not be hypothetical, but is certainly not a full one. And you're already seeing politicians react in the negative way to even something that isn't fully thought out in the case of Premier Eby in particular. What signal does that send to private capital about the likelihood of doing business here? And that's where I think if it is true that Prime Minister Carney wants to move fast and break things and do things differently, he has an opportunity, not necessarily in accepting this proposal, but going back to the root issues of why that private capital is not coming here. And it's looking at the tanker ban and the environmental assessment bill and the emissions cap and all of these things that Amanda is right weren't allowed under the previous administration that he committed to looking at, and now they're mum on.
I've been reading a lot of backlash as well from people who say, this really sucks that it has to be taxpayer dollars being used to fund this. And to that, I completely agree. It does really suck. Doesn't that make you incredibly sad? Especially because it doesn't have to be like that at all. This is the environment they created. And it's either we try our darndest, we really test this government and see how serious they are, or we don't. And we suffer either way. So the best of both evils there, what do we do?
Well, I think Mr. Carney should keep his promise. He promised that he would negotiate a win with the United States by July 21st. Where's the win? Since Mr. Carney took office promising to be a brilliant negotiator, American tariffs on Canada have more than doubled, and they have much broadened. China, smelling weakness, has hit our farmers and fish harvesters with increased tariffs as well. Mark Carney is losing trade wars with Beijing and with Washington, and Canadians are paying the price after 6 months of broken promises. I would call on Mark Carney to immediately eliminate his tariffs on Canadian industry. Get rid of the industrial carbon tax. Get rid of anti-development laws so that we can start producing more here in Canada. Get out of the way and let builders build homes so that they can so that our lumber can go into home building. Those are the best ways that we can stand up for our country. And we're here to propose as well, not just oppose. I'm offering Mr. Carney something very generous. We propose the Canada Sovereignty Act, which will repeal all the anti-development laws and cut taxes. It'll bring home our technology to this country. And I'm offering Mr. Carney that I will hand him that bill and let him introduce it as a government bill. We will put aside all partisanship and let him pass that immediately. Do you think we could do that? Yeah. So we have, look at this kind of, the way we're putting differences aside for the interests of our country. This is the kind of collaboration we need in Canada.
I'm Jasmine Lane. Subscribe, follow on other social media platforms as well, and share this video. Comment your thoughts down below. Even if you don't like me, but you suffered through this video anyway, thank you. But go and support another creator who's doing this same type of stuff, because we really do need to get the word out there. I'll talk to you tomorrow.